Hello and welcome to part two of this practical guide on evaluation. And this part we're looking at what to look out for when conducting an evaluation. So this is very critical because very often when I see some of the people that I work with, in terms of my clients, the way that they have been doing evaluation sometime it's not consistent. So we want to look at what are some of the things to look out for. And and remember at the end of this session itself, do grab the checklist that you can use to kind of look through and check against how when you're doing evaluation in your organization. So the question is what to look out for. Now, let's go back to the definition provided by EFQM again. So this is the definition that we talked about in the first part of the practical guide on this 4-part practical guide here. If you haven't reviewed that, I strongly encourage you to go back and look at the part 1 of this practical guide. Essentially, this is the definition provided by the EFQM, but to begin with, I think I would like to unpack this evaluation a little bit further so to give you a bit more insight into what specifically to look out for. Now, the first thing I'd like to start off with is monitoring. Now, when we talk about monitoring, essentially there are a few things that you want to talk about or you want to pay attention to. First is you want to have a way to monitor your implementation. So if you have a particular program or a process or a plan approach, how are you implementing it and how do you monitor the implementation? So for example, if you have a program that's going to last for 10 weeks, there must be some way to check against certain milestones along the way. So throughout this 10 weeks itself, there should be at least 2 or 3 milestones, for example, to help you monitor the implementation to know what's working, what's not working, and in the interim, if there is a need to come up with some intervention strategy. So that's the monitoring of implementation. So question is, do you have a series of milestones along the way to help you decide, what are some of the things that you need to look out for when implementing this program or this process? Which then leads us to the second point that you need to take note. In order to help you monitor with this series of milestones, what will be helpful here is what we call a series of activity indicators. Now, what are activity indicators as opposed to performance indicators? Activity indicators are basically what people can, sometimes people call it process indicators. Now, so the difference between the two would be, for example, if we look at weight management as an example here, a performance indicator for me, if I'm looking at my weight, at the end of the day, the performance indicator for me would be my weight, or BMI, body mass index. However, I would need a series of activity indicators, and this activity indicators could be number of times I run a week and how far I run each time and how long I run each time, for example. So those will be the activity indicators. Now, the important point here, which we are not going into in depth in this tutorial here, but the point to note here is that there is a stark difference between activity indicators and performance indicators, because the activity indicators are something that you are able to control along the way, and you're able to calibrate so as to help you achieve the outcome. So when you're looking at these activity indicators, it helps you to monitor implementation. And finally, the monitoring has to be done on a regular basis. If you have a program that lasts for 10 weeks, you can't monitor towards the end. That is the same as just looking at this is what we call a spray and hope strategy. In other words, you just spray and you just do the work and you just implement the activity and you pray and hope that at the end of it, the outcome will be achieved. So when we talk about regular monitoring, you need to decide, for example, if you have a year-long process, a program that's going to last for a year long, what are some milestones that you need to put in place to do this regular monitoring? Would one time at half a year mark be sufficient? Sometimes it could be. Sometimes you might need a little bit more than just a half a year. So for example, if you have 2 students or 2 people that you are coaching, and both of them have got different level of progress. Yeah, obviously the one which is better able to cope, you might have less checkpoints, but the one who has some challenges in terms of coping, you might have more regular checkpoints. So this is the first part here where we look at the unpacking of the definition. So monitoring is something that is key. Now let's go back to this definition here, and let's look at another set of keywords. The second set of keywords that you want to take note is what we call assess and analysis of the results. Now, what it means by that is you, at the end of the day, when you're performing this evaluation, you want to be able to conduct a performance analysis. Now, what exactly is a performance analysis is essentially to ask yourself whether the objectives of this program, processes, or plan approach has been achieved. Yeah. How would you do that? Of course, you would need a series of performance indicators. So here, the emphasis is looking at performance indicators, whereas in the monitoring process, you're looking at activity indicators. So typically, this analysis of result is done at the end of the program on the process itself. Yeah. So remember the single and the double loop learning. This would be done at the end of a single loop. So every time after implementation of a program or a process, there is a need to perform a performance analysis to ask yourself, are those objectives achieved? Yeah, of course. In the next guide itself, we will also look at, where we talk about performance analysis, what are some things that you would need to take note of. So this is the second set of keywords that I'd like you to take note of. The third set of keyword is essentially looking at learning. Yeah, so the first set looking at monitoring. So you want to put in place a program along the way you want to monitor. At the end of it, you want to assess whether the outcomes are met. So that's the assess and analysis of results. And finally, at the end of the day, with all this information that you get, you want to consolidate your learning from there. Yeah, as well as to be able to look at certain refinement. So let's look at this last part here, learning and refinement. Essentially, you want to be able to extract key learnings or to be able to derive some insights from the information that you gather. So for example, along the way when you are doing this monitoring, you might see that, hey, the people are coming in late when we conduct this program. So for example, one of the through this data that you collected, you might say that, well, perhaps if we shift the timing of the program itself, people might be able to come in on time. Yeah, so typically when you conduct a seminar after work, a kind of rule of thumb is that you start at 7 p.m. right? You don't start at 6 p.m. because usually people get off work at about 5:30, and by the time they grab dinner and they come to your location, 6 o'clock, it's a bit of a rush. So 7 o'clock would be just nice. So that would gives you that kind of information. So when you look at the data and information that you're getting, do yourself a favor, go through that process of doing some quick analysis, as well as to see if you are able to extract some key learnings and to derive some insights from there. Yeah, so that's part one. And of course, in this process itself, you will know that some of the things are working. So you will be so glad to find that some of the programs or processes are working as fine as expected. And if they are consistently delivering the result, right? The keyword here is consistent. If they're consistently providing delivering the results that you want, then this may jolly well be your organizational best practices. So you want to be able to identify what are the best practices, because this is really critical here, because there are and there will be instances whereby people would be getting the results, and when they ask them, how do you get this results, and they'll be like, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, so that is evident of them not knowing where to look out for information to define or to identify what their best practices are. Yeah. And the last one is, of course, in this whole process itself, you may also identify that there's some areas that are not working. And so that gives you the opportunity to highlight what are some areas for improvements, or AFIs as we call it. So with identifying some of these improvement opportunities, it will allow you to bridge the gap. Okay, so in summary here, what to look out for when conducting the evaluation. These are the three key things that you want to take note of. The monitoring, yeah, so monitoring of implementation, having a series of activity indicators, and to do the monitoring on a regular basis. Assess and analysis of results, conduct performance analysis. Of course, here you need to use a series of performance indicators, and typically you do this at the end of the program or process. Yeah, and finally, the learning and refinement. You should be able to extract the key learnings, identify the best practices, as well as highlight what are some improvement opportunities. Yeah, so there you have it. The key things to look out for when you are conducting an evaluation. And just a reminder, you want to grab the checklist of this practical guide, so that as you're working on your evaluation, you will be able to check it against and to see whether you have covered all grounds. Yeah, and once again, if you found this recording or this audio or video independently outside of our website, please go ahead to lineconsulting.com. That's line consulting, one word.com, and sign up at no charge to get this 4-part practical guide, as well as all the guides and future webinars that we will conduct from time to time. Additionally, you will get to ask me a question about your organization. So, for example, if you have a question about how to make certain improvements to some of the processes, grab that recording software and record a question for me, and I will get back to you in future episodes or in future webinars. All right. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you in the next part of this practical guide, where we look at the common mistakes that people make when conducting evaluation.